In late July of 1997, when I was 14 years old, my friends and I spotted a UFO floating over the treetops near my mother's house. Afterwards, I had a very strange encounter which has left me feeling like I don't really belong here. Let me start from the beginning. It must have been about 4 or 5 in the evening. The sun was still pretty high, but my friends and I had been out all day and we were pretty beat. We were all standing on my mom's front porch, leaning against the rails and talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying our summer break. It was pretty hot, maybe high 80s, and humid. There were 5 of us: myself, Sean, Louis, Eric, and my cousin Neil. I saw it first, out of the corner of my eye. I remember thinking it was the moon. It was just obvious enough to get my attention, but not out of place enough for me to turn my head. And then it moved. My friends were all facing me, standing on the opposite end of the porch, so when I turned to look directly at the moon, the only thing my friends saw was my reaction. I said something like, "What the hell?" and lurched up off of the rail. My friends were all kind of startled and immediately turned to look. They couldn't help adding their own curses when they saw what I was looking at. It was a sphere, maybe 20 to 25 feet across, floating across the top of the trees. It wasn't a perfect sphere, but slightly squished looking and made of a dull gray metal. We could see it pretty clearly. It was maybe 800 or 900 feet away from us. It was moving away from us, kind of diagonally from left to right. It was floating 5 feet or so above the tree line. It didn't make any sound, and there were no lights or anything. It kind of reminded me of a soap bubble, the way it was moving. At some point, my friend Sean ran toward the front door to my mom's house. He fumbled with the doorknob for a bit before he managed to get it open. Then, he flung the door open and started yelling for my older brother Jonathan. My mom wasn't home, so John was in charge. I started down the steps to try and get a closer look. Nobody else moved. They all just stood there saying things over and over like, "Oh my god, dude," and "holy shit," and "it's a fucking UFO." I remember at some point the sphere started slowly bobbing up and down, sometimes going behind the trees completely, but you could still see mostly the top of it. This went on for about 30 seconds or so before it was too far away to see behind the trees. You could still kind of see it bob every now and then, but eventually it was just gone. My friends were all still yelling at my brother John to come out when I started across the road. John was inside playing Mario Kart or something, but when he finally came out, the sphere was long gone. By that point, I had reached the edge of the woods and was thinking about going in to look for it, but I was hesitating a little. My brother's response was basically to say whatever and call us gay, I think, which was a pretty innocuous insult back then, and then he just went back inside. Eventually, my friends joined me. They caught up to me on the other side of the road, and we all entered the woods together. Louis stayed behind. He was always kind of whiny and nervous and never really wanted to do anything. His one saving grace was that his dad owned some old arcade machines that he let us play for free. The rest of us stomped off through the woods for 5 minutes or so before we made it to the big clearing. We all knew the big clearing and visited it a lot. There were piles of old lumber and metal, lots of twine, old plastic trays and flower pots, broken glass, big sheets of plastic shaped like corrugated roofing, things like that. There were also a few crumbling concrete walls and old building foundations. Everything was overgrown with weeds and vines, really a cool place to explore. We all kind of spread out and started looking for the UFO. We didn't actually expect to find anything, but lo and behold, a couple of minutes later, my cousin Neil sounded like he was trying to yell or something, but it came out weird. He sort of fell down to one knee, turned, and came running back to us. I remember this very clearly. He had his head down like he was climbing out of a helicopter, waving his arms around. The whole time he was whispering, "It's there. It's there. It's there," as loud as he could whisper. His eyes were huge. His face was pale as a ghost. Neil was a big guy, almost 6 foot, pretty fit. He was a pretty good ball player and also into kickboxing, so you can imagine how odd it was to see the tough guy of the group come running at us like that. Of course, my immediate reaction was to run, because aliens. My curiosity got the better of me though, so I just kind of crouched down and waited. I did grab a little piece of rebar that was lying there, just in case I had to beat up the UFO. My heart was pounding a mile a minute. When Neil got to us, he told us he saw the thing floating behind one of the larger structures. So, we all huddled together and had a little strategy meeting. This was serious business. Eric said we needed an escape plan in case it started shooting lasers or something. So, a few seconds later, we had it all worked out. Neil would go with me around the front of the building, and Sean and Eric would go around the back. We split up, and Neil did some hand signaling like the military. He didn't know what he was doing, but we all pretended we understood. And we made our way along the edges of the clearing. We stayed as close to the trees as we could, and went in little darting motions from one hiding spot to the next, like ninjas. Neil actually did roll at one point, which was kinda stupid looking even back then. I wasn't about to tell him, but he and I eventually made our way around to the front of the building, and just like he said, there it was. We were still a good 50 yards or so from it, but we could see it plain as day. It was floating right next to a wall, doing that weird bobbing thing as it silently went back and forth across the side of the building. And this was all very surreal at the time because we were looking right at this thing and yet we couldn't really believe it. It was like seeing a guy go walking up a wall or something. Very eerie. You may wonder why no one tried to take a picture. You have to understand, first of all, that we didn't have cell phones back then, not really, let alone smartphones with camera. The idea of being able to just take a picture at any moment was not a thing back then. Best we could have done is grabbed my mom's old Polaroid, assuming we knew where it was. No one thought to go looking for it before chasing off after me. I think because we were all caught up in the moment, and deep down, we probably didn't really believe we'd see it again. Of course, we all thought about it later, and were bummed because we could have been on unsolved mysteries. It really is a shame though. What we saw would have made a great picture. My cousin and I were watching this thing for a good minute or two, latched onto each other like the scared little kids which we were. I distinctly remember his fingers digging painfully into my shoulder. That's when the crazy stuff happened. Everything until that moment was nothing but a pre-show. Walking out of the woods from the other side of the clearing was a little man. I don't know if I could say he was human or something else, but it was just this little guy. He didn't have big black eyes or a giant head or anything like that. His skin was kind of pale, and his features were kind of odd looking. He might have been bald, or he might have just had a little cap on, or something, and he was wearing this tight-fitted brown suit, kind of a dark orange brown, and he walked up to the big pinball thing, and pointed this little stick or something at it, and then pop, it appeared. The sphere, the man, all of it. Just gone. It was all very sudden, like cutting frames out of a piece of film. No sound or flash of light or anything. 1 second it's there, and then it's not. Now at this point my cousin and I were ecstatic. I mean, we were scared shitless of course, but this was like the coolest thing ever. I really wish we had a camera at that point, because after everything, that's what I would have loved to own. A little piece of that moment. So anyway, my cousin and I didn't wait around after that point. We turned around and headed back into the woods, keeping ourselves low to the ground and moving very cautiously. The excitement and the adrenaline at that point was just insane. There was a huge weight lifted when we finally made it back into the woods, but we decided to head back home as fast as possible because we didn't really feel safe waiting on Sean and Eric. We'd been running for a minute or two when we started hearing this buzzing noise. It didn't sound so much like electricity or static, more like a big mosquito or an electric razor or something. Well, my cousin said, "Oh shit," and started running faster without even looking at me. The last memory I have of my cousin in that moment is the back of his black and white striped polo disappearing around the trunk of a pine tree. As I said before, my cousin was kind of athletic. Under normal circumstances, I couldn't keep up with him, but these were not normal circumstances. He was way out of sight by the time I got to that pine tree. Those of you who have touched a 9-volt battery to your tongue will know the taste I experienced next, when I got hit by whatever kind of crazy energy it was that hit me. I distinctly remember the buzzing sound getting louder all of a sudden, and then I had this metallic taste in my mouth, and it really was in my nose too. Kind of the whole front of my face went numb, and then I think I tripped on something, and the next thing I know, I smacked into the ground and got a face full of wet pine needles. Everything went blank after that. My next memory is of me lying on my back on a hard, slick surface, with some kind of warm liquid running down my back. My arms were restrained, and I felt kind of weak, so I could barely lift my head or my legs. It was pretty dark, and my memory is sort of fuzzy, but I have a very strong sense that the room was full of mist or steam. I very distinctly remember it being warm. There was also a smell, which was very strong and smelled like some kind of chemicals, maybe ammonia or bleach, and it made my skin itch. Surprisingly for me even now, I was not scared at all. I was a little uncomfortable and didn't like that my arms were restrained, but I was more annoyed than scared. I guess I must have been under some kind of sedative. I drifted in and out of consciousness a few times, so I'm not sure how much time passed, but at some point, I heard a voice. I don't understand this part at all, and it makes no sense to me even now, but at the time, I was certain that that voice I heard was my father's voice. It was very clear and distinct, and I'd heard it a million times. It sounded like it was right beside my ear. It addressed me by my name, and it asked how I was feeling. I think I just said, "Fine, can you turn the light off?" Or something like that, which made no sense because the room was dark. The voice responded sternly and said, "Try to relax. They're not going to hurt you." The next thing I remember is something brushing my legs. It felt like something was painting my legs with a paintbrush. I don't know how weird that sounds, but that's the best way I can describe it. I think I said, "Something stings," and my father's voice said, "It's almost over. Close your eyes." I then felt this intense stabbing pain in my chest. It literally felt like something was piercing my breastbone right in the middle. I had this intense visual at the time of a big scorpion stinger, but I didn't actually see anything that I remember. I screamed out, and then suddenly something hard and cold with a rounded tip was pressed into my forehead, and I blacked out. I woke up a few more times, but there were no more moments of pain. I felt a small hand stroking my cheek at one point. It was very soft and felt like a child's hand. It was warm and very soothing. I think I asked if I could talk to Mom a few times, but nobody responded to me. The last time I woke up, I heard my father's voice again. It said something very strange. "When you return, some things will be different. The differences will not be immediately apparent, but I want you to look for them. The next time we meet, I will ask you about the differences, and you must tell me. This is very important." For some reason, I said, "I can't anymore. It's too hard." He responded, "You lie at your center as we all do. Paths form layers in every direction, surfaces within surfaces, but they are still you. You will see." There was a change in air pressure, like someone opening a window in a car. There was no wind or light or anything. And then, next thing I know, I'm sitting in the grass on the edge of the woods, near a playground. I recognized the playground. It was right down the street from my mother's house. I looked to my left and saw my friend Sean's face. He was right in my face, but I didn't really recognize him at first. I was still pretty out of it. He looked really concerned, and so did the other guys who were kind of standing around me. Everyone but my brother had come to look for me after waiting at the house for a while, and I remember thinking it was the funniest thing that they were all so concerned. I can't really explain it, but I guess I was just kind of still sedated, because the looks on their faces were so hilarious. When they got me to stand up, I kind of came to, and they started asking me what had happened to me. At first I told them I couldn't remember. Later that evening, I told my cousin Neil that I just got winded and passed out because I honestly wasn't sure what to say. That got passed around to the others and just kind of became the story. It's been almost 20 years now, and we all still talk about the UFO and the little man every now and then. It turns out Eric and Sean didn't actually see the little man. They had taken a longer way around the building in the clearing, so all they saw was the top of the sphere kind of bobbing over the top of the building, and then saw it disappear. Eric claims that he had seen some shadow guys following them on the way back, and we all suspect that may be bullshit. Eric has a way of trying to upstage people to get attention. The part that keeps me up at night, the part that I don't even talk about with them, is this unshakable feeling that I've had since the day in the woods. Something is not right. I can't quite put my finger on it, but sometimes it just feels like things shouldn't be the way they are. Sometimes people just act weird, like they're not themselves. There are subtle things about people's faces that just don't sit well with me, and it keeps getting worse. And for some reason I can't explain, I have this feeling of sadness, almost like I've lost someone. It's crazy, but I just don't feel like I'm really where I'm supposed to be. Over the years, I've had multiple dreams where I'm back in that dark, warm room with the fog and the stinging smell. There are people all around me, and I have a sense of familiarity. As I get older, I'm having the dreams more and more frequently, and yet, it gets harder and harder to remember them. The strangest and most terrifying moment of this whole process happened just a few years ago, when I had just turned 30. I was listening to an old voicemail I had left to my wife on her cell phone. I remember getting kind of shaky and actually dropping the cell phone on the bed. My wife instinctively knew that something was wrong and rushed over to try to console me. I didn't know how to tell her. That was the day I suddenly realized it was not my father's voice that had spoken to me so many years ago. It was mine. It was around 9:15 p.m., roughly around mid-August 2010. My colleague, also a best friend at the time, and I were driving home from where we worked. He was driving, and as usual, I was gazing up at the stars. I happened to notice two blinks of light traveling parallel to each other. For a split second, I thought they were satellites, but they were moving faster than the usual satellites that I normally would see, and as I said, they were parallel to each other, which is abnormal. Immediate speculation led us to pull over to the side of the highway to check it out. They crossed the entire sky span within a matter of 3 minutes. Then they stopped and started going back the way they came. I immediately knew that this was my first UFO encounter, so I'm ecstatic. I then look in the distance to where they were traveling towards, and I see two more identical blinks of light traveling in the same parallel pattern going towards the first two. As soon as they meet up, it seemed as if they were low in our atmosphere, about 500 to 800 feet above ground level. They sit there and do nothing for about 2 minutes. Then it happened. They took turns glowing in orange and red color. As soon as the first one would turn off its glowing light, the next one would start glowing, each only about 1 second each. Out of nowhere, there were two more. A total of 6 UFOs hovering above the road we were on, taking turns emitting their welcoming light. I started freaking out. I'm literally punching my friend saying, "Are you seeing this?" I call 911 and let them know what was going on, and he proceeds to tell me that I should report it to the county I'm in. He gives me the number for the local police department, and before I hang up, he asks, "How is it?" I replied, "Simply incredible." The local police department unfortunately didn't take me very seriously and most likely didn't even go on record. By this time, there was an older couple on a motorcycle with us watching these UFOs glow. In one final brilliant moment, they all lit up with this beautiful color. They then started drifting away to the south, again taking turns emitting light until I could not see them anymore. We then drove back home going east. The motorcycle couple who were traveling in the same direction flashed their lights at us, so we pulled over. We see them again, but very far away south, doing their light show again. We sit there for about 15 minutes trying to see more. All of a sudden, we hear something, which was strange considering we heard no noise at all during this UFO encounter. There were now 6 fighter jets circling the sky in the exact areas we saw the UFOs. It was simply amazing, and I will never forget this incredible moment in my life.